Welcome back to the Ministry Without Hating It podcast, a ministry of Odyssey Haven coaching and counseling dedicated to the pursuit of answering the question, is it possible to do ministry without hating it? We have a theory that it just might be. I am Chad Garrison. I'm here with Brenton Hill. Brenton, how are you doing?
I am so good.
You're so good. Why are you so good?
Well, we just finished a podcast with Paul and Janice Rice.
That's right.
I've been sitting here for an hour and 40 minutes. And what encouragement.
Yes, 100%. I mean, you jumped ahead, but that's okay. Sometimes when Brenton, just a little insider info, when Brenton's really excited about something, he just takes the lead.
I just go.
I've just noticed that. And so, yes, he set us up quite nicely. We just had a fantastic interview, which you guys are about to hear. Conversation with Paul and Janice Rice. They are have been pastoring a church that they planted for over 20 years now. You get to hear a little bit of that story, but just a wealth of knowledge and wisdom and gold. Would you agree with that?
Oh yeah. And I have some personal stake in it. I was youth pastors. They pulled my wife and I into youth pastoring early on, and so
it's their fault.
It's their fault. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. That's
good. We all need a person that it's their fault that we can point back to and then also thank. Yeah. And you definitely get a chance to do that within this interview. I'm really excited for everyone to hear this because they just bring their unique church planting / pioneering, because that's really what it is, perspective to ministry and even the longevity of that. And so we are super excited to get this rolling. A little bit longer this time around, but I can assure you it is well worth it. And so without further ado, we hope you enjoy our conversation with Paul and Janice Rice. Well, it is my pleasure to welcome Paul and Janice Rice to the podcast. You guys, we have our kickoff questionnaire, and these are questions that have nothing to do with ministry but need to be asked anyway. So I've got to ask both of you, what's your favorite meal of the day and why?
Oh, I love breakfast. Mostly because I like peanut butter, and I eat toast with peanut butter on it, and peanut butter is great.
For me personally, coffee counts as a meal, and you can have any time during the day, and so it is a meal supplement or replacement, in my opinion.
Praise the Lord.
Yes.
I feel like my wife would agree with you. That's good. All right, if you could bring back any fashion trend, what would it be?
Let's go.
It would not be corduroy.
Okay.
I've seen some of the fashion trends of Paul and Janice Rice from back in the day. So
nice.
Okay, it's peg pants and big bangs.
Man,
bring it. Those are the golden years.
For me, It's just t-shirts and flannel. I don't know that it ever went out. Maybe it is out, and I don't know. Maybe it is something that needs to be brought back. But
I mean, you guys are Pacific Northwest, so
yeah.
That's kind of standard issue, isn't it?
Pretty mellow up here.
Yeah.
Sweatshirts, flannels, and jeans, shorts.
Okay. This is good. See, these are the important questions. That's why we get them out of the way right off the top.
This one is just ridiculous.
All right, here we go. If you were a professional wrestler, what would your entrance theme song be?
We were just actually talking about this. We go to a church conference, and they have theme music when they introduce the speakers.
Yeah.
They put like a bio up on the screen, and so we've been laughing about like what would our theme song be if we were going to do it at the church.
Okay.
I don't.
Mine would be "Welcome to the Jungle."
Yes. Right
and
on.
the guitar is
yes,
excellent in that song.
Yeah.
I don't know what mine
That's
would
good.
be. Man, we should have read these questions first. Huh?
Something about a big truck and country.
I'm feeling Final Countdown for Paul.
Yeah, there we go. That's
We're
good.
almost there.
He could rock that.
That's been my saying lately. It won't be long now.
Yep.
Yeah.
It's coming
That's
down.
Nice. Yeah. That's great. All right. Last one, at least for this section. What do you find exciting in life right now?
The fact that Fiji just reopened.
Oh, yeah.
that has been like my joy since Valentine's Day. It was like my Valentine's Day present, finding out that Fiji is open to all tourists. So definitely planning on heading to Fiji.
Okay.
For me, we're getting ready to possibly build a house, a spec house. And I love like plans and the planning stage of that. It's a lot of fun.
Okay. So you got a few things.
Our new kids have been just a joy. They've been amazing.
Paul, how many houses have you built in your life so far?
Oh, what? 3? I think 3.
But then remodeling.
Then we remodeled 3 or 4.
Completely houses. Yeah.
But when I say build them, like we built them as a family from ground up.
Yeah.
Like hammered the nails and all that.
That's
wow.
like
the whole.
That's like 3 more than most people in life.
Yeah.
It pays for ministry.
Yes, it does. Yes, it does.
It really, we noticed, we were just talking about that yesterday. It's really bonded us as a family.
Yes.
And has given our family kind of a sense of unity and just that we could take on anything, which I love about my kids. Like they feel like they can attack anything and overcome it.
Yeah. I was just talking to my dad about some of the same things. He instilled in me, like, I might not know how to do something, but I can learn. And so I can do everything. And for sure. It's great instilled things from our fathers. So well done, Paul.
So you've managed to totally conquer the questionnaire, which is great. So then moving on, what does the word ministry mean to you guys? You're laughing, so it's going to be good. I can't wait.
For us, it's been like our whole, like everything, and I don't want to say ministry, it's kind of cliche to say it means everything, but I don't mean it in that it means everything to us, but it means everything like in our world. Like our whole lives have been about ministry. Everything we do, when we work, it's the support ministry. When we, everything that we do, it seems like revolves around ministry. And so that's the first word that comes to mind with me. Is it's everything.
For me, I have actually only ever been paid for ministry. I've been part-time to full-time in ministry since I was 18 years old, but I've only ever been paid $200 a month one time, which was amazing for a short period of time for the ministry that I do. So for me, it's never been about a career. It's always like, this is lifestyle. This is what I'm called to do. And fortunately, I married a guy that can support us as a family so that I can just go do ministry however and, wherever the Lord leads. But, for us, it's not about a position or it's not about a paycheck ever. It's never been about that.
Which we won't say how old Janice is, but she's been doing ministry for how long?
Well, I've been a youth pastor for 30 years.
Yeah.
Holy smokes. Okay.
And she had 60 kids there last week.
Yeah.
In a small family. So she's doing something right.
Yeah.
So and to be in it for 30 years, you have way outlived as far as most youth pastors and their tenure.
Yeah. So Brenton can attest to what my youth pastoring was like as an 18-year-old because he was actually in my youth group as a 6th grader.
Yep. Janice was one of my first youth pastors. Was my first youth pastor.
Yeah. So if there's anything wrong with him, it probably is my fault. It started. Yeah.
All right. Well, you heard it here first.
So you're to blame. Well, so you've kind of answered this a little bit, Janice, and maybe you guys can pull this out a little bit more with what you just answered. But how has your own journey, whether it's in ministry or even just in life, how has that shaped your definition of ministry?
For me, my family's been in ministry going back a couple generations at least that I know of. And, I saw my parents pastor and my dad get burned out and kind of some consequences of that. He was in a bad accident in the interim after resigning from the church. He was driving truck and doing some stuff and kind of opened him up to a bad accident that ultimately he died from. And so like how that's kind of shaped my ministry in my life is I saw my dad get burned out. And he did that for several reasons. He kind of followed some things. He was at a church where it was difficult, and then the district did some stuff that was difficult, and he pushed himself a little harder than he should have in that season. And, and so for us, like, we've been really careful to, one, not burn ourselves out, but two, be careful of what we're following. Mm-hmm. We've really, in critical decisions, that it's come down to, we're going to put it all on following God mm-hmm. instead of what man wants us to do. Mm-hmm. So just looking back, that's life situation that kind of influenced our ministry and how we look at it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. For both of us, we're both pastors' kids. So growing up with ministry, I would say our family now is way more involved in ministry than I ever was as a pastor's kid. Mm-hmm. But that heart for the church, has always been there. And then just, getting personally called into ministry and having an encounter with Jesus and, just following that leading. I mean, I think, it's just this adventure, in my opinion, where it just kind of keeps getting better and better. Like that honestly is my opinion. I actually think it gets more and more fun the longer you're in it. If you do it right. And if you listen to the Holy Spirit and you make the hard decisions that you need to, I just think it gets more and more fun. You just, when you're faithful with the little things he gives you more. And, that more is usually, the really fun stuff, the stuff that causes, greater impact, in your community and missions or whatever. So, yeah.
If you don't mind, I want to pause there and drill in on that just a little more because also too, and we haven't mentioned this yet, you guys are also church planners. Yeah. I don't know if you still consider yourself church planners because you just celebrated 20 years.
It's really weird knowing when you make that transition. I feel like our
we graduated.
I do feel like our church is getting more mature, but that's a big question. When is it no longer a pioneer church?
Oh, absolutely. It's funny. That's one of the questions that I did have.
Cool. I love talking.
In my own experience that, I definitely noticed a shift, but so add in church planning, which is not for the faint of heart. I'll just say that. Mm-hmm. And that's without, experience withstanding. But you said something like it becomes more and more fun mm-hmm. if you do it right. Can you pull that out a little bit more for us?
Yes. So I think, going back to church planting, that was probably the most wonderful and most horrible thing that we have ever done in our adult married life and in ministry. It drove us to our knees. It's the only time in my life I've ever felt like I've had an anxiety attack. I just didn't know what it was. It just was so hard, but we chose at that point, we're going to follow Jesus. We're going to do this. It felt like jumping off the Grand Canyon. And then early on church planting, when we talk about hard decisions, there was people that wanted to influence us as young pastors. So we church planted when Paul was 30, I was 26. And people kind of looked at these young pastors like, oh, we can kind of do what we want because these young pastors will just go along with whatever. And we really had to put our foot down and lead strongly. And the Holy Spirit just gave us the authority to do that, which was awesome. But it also split the church. So, but you know what? I mean, the church grew to 120 people in the first year, which we were like, woohoo! And then we had to address some very difficult things, sin in the church, and it split to 40.
Twice. We split it twice in the first year. That was a rough year.
Yeah.
So then really, that's really when we got back to our core and we could grow from there. And so I would just say, even though the enemy wanted to abort that church plant and really wanted to just take it down, just watching God come through and rebuild things really well. Mm-hmm. And, honestly, I felt like we were probably in the building, the really serious building phase until probably our 14th anniversary when we paid off the building.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So I really think it took that long at least to really get our feet under us. And then, since then, you got the building paid off, you can kind of start doing the fun stuff because you're just not working so hard just to make a payment. And it just really kind of, I feel like has multiplied and I don't know, like just when you've been in a community 20 years, 14 to 20 years, you do get more influence, you can make a greater impact because people trust you. And I just really think from year 14 to year 20 has just been a blast. It's been much more fun.
We'll probably get into it more, but something that happened in us in that time of going through painful experiences, and we had a couple painful experiences even before starting the church. And even in starting the church, that's a long story. That was like, we hit roadblock after roadblock, but we absolutely knew God was calling us to do it. So, and her referring to the jumping off the Grand Canyon the night before we started the church, that's an image that was in my hand. I really felt like we were holding hands and saying, okay, let's go. And like, it felt like we were holding hands, jumping off the Grand Canyon and saying, okay, God's got us. Let's see where this lands. But something back to life experience that kind of shaped our ministry is the other part of Dad resigning ministries. We started going to a large Foursquare church, really an amazing church, but because of its size, it had very, very qualified people in every aspect. There were several youth secretaries and interns and youth pastors, and so. When I was just around graduation time, I knew I was going into ministry, and another little church in the area didn't have a youth pastor. So they asked me if I'd come over, and I sat down and tried preparing a sermon, and I was absolutely in no way prepared for ministry. Like I had no idea what I was doing, and it just hit me that we need to be equipping the youth and equipping people for ministry. And so that's really shaped our ministry, every aspect, and even our family, like in planning the church. And part of the family dynamic is our kids feel like they planted a church, even though they were little at the time. Katie's working with Brenton. You could ask her, and, she was a pastor just like we were. Like she had carried, and kids do. I mean, kids of pastors carry a lot of responsibility of the ministry, a lot of the burden of the ministry, a lot of the effects of ministry. So they need some credit for that, even if it's just within the family unit. We brought them along, and, when we had big decisions, they prayed about it just like we did. It's their input and those kind of things was valued, within the family.
Mm-hmm.
I love that word, equip. I feel like that is the work of the ministry, and regardless of what it is. But specifically equipping the leaders to do it, because I have almost a similar background of like coming in of like no formal training. It's all been on the job, and yet somehow here we are, type of a thing. So I know exactly that totally resonates with me. I'm curious too then. Because you had mentioned in the first year, like you grew to 120, right? And I remember as a church planner, you're just like, if anybody shows up,
right.
Like, praise the Lord, we had 10, awesome, that's great, And so I'm curious though, when it comes to, especially as you look back now, what your definition of success in ministry was then versus what you would say, would you say year 14 through 20?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. We just celebrated our 20th anniversary in December. So success back then, really for us, it was really wanting to do what God's called us to do. That was the challenge, because we were being told no, we were being told different things by different people. And it really came down to, okay, God, I'd rather fall flat on my face following you than succeed following man. And so that kind of drove us then. And part of the reason God laid Rainier on our heart is there's a lot of broken people here. The economy's down. Its primary industry was logging, back in the day, and then it had a nuclear power plant that was shut down. So there was it's been really hit financially and economically. And so like even last Sunday, and every pastor knows the attendance goes up and down. You have your Sundays, and if you emotionally ride that, and it's hard not to, as a pastor, it destroys you.
Yeah.
And it's hard not to, because, let's face it, when the church is full and things are happening, everybody's excited, it feels good as a pastor. But what we've had to come to grips with back then, and even still now, you have a low Sunday, the individuals that come, like, that's where I get my motivation. Like last Sunday, there was a lady there that is trying to get off alcohol, and she kind of came a little bit, and then we didn't see her for a year or so, and she's been back last month or so. And, to me, that's why I do what I do, the little wins like that, these people that their faith is a lifeline. Like they're done without their faith, and they need that, and they're hanging on, so I've always looked around at people like that. Like that's the motivation and success is seeing those lives changed. Yeah. And one of the things along those lines, when we started the church, I really felt like the Lord told me that we were gonna collect people that other churches wouldn't want, wouldn't see value in. And then the Lord told me I'm going to turn them into diamonds. Oh, wow. And that really has been my motivation, from the beginning, and for us, because we're in a low income area, the thought of being a well-paid pastor has never been there. And so we've kind of figured out how to do finances on our own. And we feel like God has blessed us just immensely. Like he's just been there financially, emotionally, church-wise. I mean, the church is doing amazing. We're just in a sweet spot and having fun in ministry. It's just been fun. Mm-hmm. But and going through that first year, one of the things that came out of that is we made up our minds we weren't going to pastor a church we didn't want to go to. And I could empathize with that. That's Sunday morning, you don't want to walk into a church and like, okay, who's talking, who's mad, who's upset with me this week for doing something, and we're just like, we're just going to love people and we're going to address issues. We're not going to let things slide. We're not going to push things under the carpet. If somebody's not fully with us, they're not with us, and so that's kind of been our heart for ministry. And we've just made it a point that we're going to enjoy ministry. It is, and we've worked towards that, having a church that we can enjoy and people that we love and that love us and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. You guys get the benefit because you did plant a church. You can set all of that culture and that kind of mindset. For Chad and I, we're right now in long-standing situations that had a whole heartbeat before we got here and got entered in. Do you have any thoughts towards those types of situations as well in the same line of thinking?
Just like anything in life, what you invest is what you're going to reap, and what you put up with is what you'll end up with. And like in youth ministry, when we're youth pastors, one of the solid principles I learned from my youth pastor, we were volunteering when we were in Bible college for a little youth group, and it was chaos. The junior hires knew that when they got to the gym, they were going to run. And so then it would turn into this thing where then the youth pastor would clamp down on them, and he'd line them up on the wall and say, we're not going to go do the next thing until everybody's quiet. And you always got some junior high kid snickering or something. And so I was talking to my youth pastor, Harry Faulkner, about it. And he made the comment that the kids, they'll live up to what the expectation is, and they know what to expect when they walk in the room. And so what that led to is youth pastor, when I would see something I didn't like, we would crack down on it pretty swift and not stern, but firm. Kids talking or something, we just wouldn't allow it. The kids wanted to sit on the couch, we wouldn't allow it. And it turned into a culture where kids knew when they came to youth group, they were going to worship, they were going to, be respectful and those kind of things. And it played out pretty well. We've went straight from youth ministry to planting. So I don't know that I have a lot of authority to speak to that. But human nature, people know what to expect, and somehow you got to change that. And the longer you wait to discipline or direct or lead, the harder it is to do it.
Yeah, for sure. Well, it sounds like you guys have had to have those hard conversations, even though you're setting the culture. Yeah. It sounds like that, regardless whether it's an established culture that you're having to actually transform, maybe because it's not healthy. That really you have to go right at it and not kind of tiptoe around it.
I think the position that you hold in the church is important. The only time Paul and I have ever stepped into a church that was already going and an older church was when we were in Bible college and we had just graduated. And that was a congregation with a 80-year-old pastor.
Yeah, average age
Oh,
they
nice.
had to help the organist up to the organ.
Yeah.
Nice.
And so here we are, just college graduates bursting with, motivation and evangelism and, vision and all this. And we really needed to submit to the pastor who was in place. And we could only do what we could do. So it's entirely different when you are the senior pastor and you can make those changes, rather when you need to submit and you just need to say, okay, the 70-year-old piano player and the 80-year-old organist are going to be the, people who do the worship every week. I don't get to do that, So yeah, it's how much freedom you have because of the position you're in as well.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Learn in that situation that you can thrive in any environment if you make a decision to worship and to, even with an organist that's in her 80s, like you can worship the Lord.
Yeah.
That's good. Well, I think, man, okay, so I can tell you are still, that's the heart of a church planner right there, in my opinion. I can tell that you guys are still in that space, because to be able to say, no, it's not just obedience, but it's service too, you know what I mean? Yeah. And worship. I love that. We're going to worship regardless of what it is in the setting and what we've got, because that's where God has placed us.
Yeah. Yeah. And one of to that, we had an old guy in the church, and amazing guy, got saved later in life. He was an alcoholic. None of his kids were serving the Lord when we started the church. Anyway, he started coming and brought his wife. She had never been in church, got saved, but she passed away, and then it was just him. And so one day he came to Janice and he said, I don't want you to turn the music down because you're reaching young people, but my ears are changing, and so I can't handle the loud noise anymore. So don't be offended when I put in earplugs and I'm in the back of the church with earplugs in. He's like, don't change anything. Don't be offended, but I have to accommodate, getting older. I love that heart in older people. And I actually shared that with our seniors group this last week. That's one of the things I love. You talk about building culture in is really, and you need to remind them often that seniors, they need to see what's going on. And the why behind it, just like young people need the why behind everything. So do seniors, in understanding the reason it's a little louder, the reason you're a little uncomfortable is we're reaching a different demographic than you are.
Yeah. Wow. That's good.
I had a conversation with my mom, actually.
Yep.
The church, she actually, I could probably share names on this one. It was Beaverton Foursquare, and Randy Remington came in, and he canceled the Thursday night service. Well, that upset a lot of older people, and she was one, and it's a bunch of her friends, and and so she was processing that with me, and I'm like, Mom, if Beaverton Foursquare continues to cater to those in their 70s and above, they're not going to be a church in 20 years, 10 years, and so they have to change gears and start accommodating younger ones, and that's going to make the older ones uncomfortable, but it's necessary.
So I'm just kind of in that same vein, because I'm curious, what do you feel like needs to be in place, whether it's within leadership or maybe even what you're trying to instill in the congregation, we'll just call it that, that culturally creates a space where that heart that you just mentioned, that we're here and we recognize it's not just one age group, and we're also not sidelining the seniors, but that it's everybody all in the same, and we're all in this together. Yeah. What needs to be in place to be able to continue to cultivate and foster that kind of culture?
So I'll just speak to that real quickly. So I will tell you how old I am. I'm 48. And with that in mind, I realized that I am quickly getting to be the old lady on the worship team. And so one thing that we have always done intentionally is to pull younger musicians onto our worship team, because there is just a freshness that comes with, they present you with, hey, what do you think about this worship song? What do you think about this? And it who's on the stage kind of shows like, just that they need to see themselves represented in the congregation. But also with that in mind, we'll have any generation help transition the service or do announcements so that all ages are represented on the stage. So that's something that we just intentionally do. But I know that I mean, for myself, like I still help lead worship, but I probably will not be doing that in the next year or two, just intentionally, because I think we have to make room for that next generation that's coming. So that's something that it's just like, okay, I know that this season's coming to an end and I got to release those things. If we do want the church to keep growing and to, stay young.
With these kind of things, and this is a thought that I'm not done processing, so it's in process. But one of the benefits I've looked at with our life and our ministry is being funded partly from the church and partly outside of the church has taken a lot of pressure off. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that we've made it a conscious decision to do as a church is young people, kids and youth have always been a high priority. Obviously not neglecting, like you mentioned, not neglecting the older folks. And we aren't, and I don't believe in I believe in a multi-generational church. I don't believe that it's one generation. You focus on that and that's your church. Right. Because older people, if you can get them praying, and honestly, through the years, the older people, the single older ladies have probably been the biggest financial support we've had. They don't give a lot, but they give faithfully. And so, you can't discredit that by any means. But I've seen a lot of pastors that will take the money that comes in as a salary instead of hiring a youth pastor, instead of hiring a children's pastor. And I wish more pastors could get that. I think I'd rather go get a job at McDonald's and hire a children's pastor than to neglect that. That kind of heart. Like us personally, we've made sacrifices personally to do things like that, to focus on youth and young people and that kind of thing. But then also to honor the older ones. But I think the bivocational pastor is something to be honored and in high regard. Those pastors that make sacrifices in order to reach people, especially when it's in order to hire youth pastors or focus on something along those lines. I think it's really, really valuable.
Yeah. Well, and so I heard this from both of you, and I think this is why I can not even having been to your church, I can see why the culture is what it is, because it really flows from you out. So you already come in with this intentionality to not to be served, but to serve, but also that there's that humility that's within that, it's going to take all of us, and it can't just be one guy getting all the salary, like you said. That's fantastic. And I think that is some great wisdom that any church setting and leadership really should take and run with.
When I was young and the Lord was calling me into ministry, I kind of felt like I wanted to go into missions. And this is a conversation God and I had over several years, but and just praying like, Lord, what do you have for me? What do you want me to do? And I feel like he told me I called you to pastor people, which, I felt like, as youth pastor for a season, I didn't feel like that was a stepping stone. I felt like I was fulfilling my calling and pastoring and shepherding people. But all along missions was kind of like, but Lord, I want to be a part of missions. And in that, I felt like the Lord just kind of showed me, as Americans, we are so stinking wealthy. Mm-hmm. And if we mobilize the American church to send money to the mission field and to send missionaries to the mission field, me as a pastor, I can do more for missions with that heart than I can going. Mm-hmm. And so that kind of has been fueled me. And what it changed in my outlook on the church is the dollars that come in the offering plate, the money that comes into the church doesn't belong to Riverside. It doesn't belong to our local church. It belongs to the kingdom. And so how do those kingdom dollars need to be spent? Mm-hmm. It's like, well, we got to reach youth and young people in this area and train them up. Otherwise, we won't have another generation behind us. And so you kind of look at the dollars. They aren't just coming into Riverside to make, to pay the pastors or to pay the mortgage. Like, and I've seen pastors neglect a mortgage to take a salary, and consequently the church doesn't ever pay off a bill, or, they rent forever. And I've seen pastors, take a salary and sacrifice children's ministry or, sacrifice something else. And, but the dollars that come in, when you look at it that way, it's like, well, we can supplement our income a little bit. So I have a lot of time. And ultimately, I mean, my goal is to have a full-time pastor and be full-time in ministry. And I think we're almost there. But planting a church in a low income area, it kind of, you know, it takes a long time to establish that. And, you know, so consequently, we've also, because of that heart, we've been able to give a lot to missions as well. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of
that's great. Pardon me. No, I love it because it places the emphasis where it's supposed to be. And that's, once again, I know we keep bringing up the pioneer spirit, but that is, it's, you know, you do what you got to do to get things done. In this case, it sounds like getting the people done and equipped. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But also understanding your context and where you're at. Yeah. That's the dream of ministry and full time or whatever that is. If it's not a dream, you know, it's the expectation, may not be a reality. And so therefore, what are my options?
Yeah. I think if more, even going back to your question about an older congregation and transitioning and all that kind of stuff, I think that even plays into that. You know, when you're not worried about your salary coming from the church, it just takes a pressure off and allows you to see things differently. I listen to Dave Ramsey all the time, and people will call in, you know, why should I pay off my mortgage when I'm, you know, I got less than a 2% rate? I can get more than that in the bank now. And he's like, but you think differently. You make different decisions when you don't have that house payment over your head.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah.
Kind of true for ministry. When our income, when we recognize it comes from the Lord and not from the congregation, it takes a pressure off that I think we think differently and we look at people differently and all those kind of things.
Yeah.
Yeah. We, my wife and I, we bought a house from the city that, you know, cost us $2,500. It was a dump, but we remodeled it, and for the first time in our lives, we didn't have a house payment. And in that season of time, we were like, we can do whatever we want to do. Like, literally, the thinking changes, and you go, I can go anywhere at any time in the drop of a hat. If somebody needs something, I can be there. And that changed the way that we think about money completely. And so, yeah, there is such a freedom in living outside of those. It's just you feel like you're boundless. You can just do whatever God calls you to do immediately without fear.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, and in that same vein, I'm curious because this is something I did want to ask too. You in some ways have answered it, but speaking to the bivocation, you know, because oftentimes that can be seen as, they're not as successful or, you know what I mean? They're doing something wrong. What wisdom or what would you pass along to those that maybe feel in that mindset? Because you've already answered, like I said, we don't have this hanging over our heads. So we don't have to worry about, you know, that and where the money's going to come from or if people will stop giving, that kind of a thing. But what would you add to maybe encourage somebody who is bivocational or even trivocational or, you know what I mean? Like whatever.
So when we were working at that little church in California, the pastor that was 80 years old there, he says, Lord, I don't expect you to give me something for nothing, but help me to see the opportunities when they come. And so Paul and I have adopted that. And so with having to be really creative, you know, planting non-denominationally, you know, there just isn't that instant punch of $30,000 to help you get going. So we were just like completely reliant on the Lord. So, I mean, everything from, you know, doing daycare to owning a bouncy house company to piano lessons to Paul mill writing, you know, whatever it is that we did for driving extra work, driving a school bus, coaching track, you know, we've done a lot of different things. But what that does for you as a pastor is it gives you an empathy for the people in your congregation because you understand they are exhausted and their time is really valuable. And so when they come at the end of a workday and they serve in children's ministry for an evening program or whatever, you have this empathy of where they're at because you are also tired. You just put in a lot of work. And so there is more of a team mindset, I think, of, hey, we're doing this together and it's costing all of us blood, sweat, and tears. And I don't know. I just think for us, it has given us a really good perspective on where people in the congregation are at. They're up early and they are going to bed late, sacrificing to be in ministry with us. And we're doing the same thing.
That hit me when I was youth pastor. one of the guys in the church had a concrete company, and he needed some help on a big pour. So he asked if I'd come help him. And so he was at my house at like 4:30, 5 in the morning, to pick me up. And he does this all the time. And I know, if really faithful guy, didn't know what people tithe, but I knew he was probably a generous giver. And so jump in his truck. I don't remember, 4:35, something like that in his truck. And he's ready to talk about the word. Like he had already been in the word that morning. And he worked his tail off all day long. And, concrete, I think flat work is some of the hardest work you could ever do. You're shoveling and pushing, concrete mud around and carrying forms. And, and this guy worked like that. And it just hit me. It's like, that's who's tithing. That's where our salaries are coming from. That's who's paying the light bill. And I really grew in a deep respect for, the guys in the congregation that give, faithfully and sacrificially.
Yeah.
That also, in my experience, it makes me want to dig more gold out for them from the Word of God, to dig more, to hear more clearly, to be more faithful. It's like it's an encouraging circle that goes around and around.
Yeah.
When you see that, yeah.
I would encourage youth pastors, especially, because they're all trying to figure out, how do we get into schools? How do we reach these kids that we're trying to reach? Well, go coach, volunteer coach.
Yeah.
I've led kids to the Lord on a school bus on the way to a track meet. Yeah. You want them to let you into the schools, but could you serve somehow? Yeah. Could you get in there and serve and rub elbows with these kids you're trying to reach? Yeah. Or, with Paul millwrighting, going into mills and turning wrenches with guys that are on their third marriage and alcoholics. I mean, that's ministry. That's like, how are you ever going to get into those spaces, if you just stay inside the church? And so I just think, man, it's an incredible opportunity to reach the world.
Gives you great illustrations. Absolutely.
Too. Yes, it does.
That's right. That's so good. Well, I thank you for that perspective, because I think that is something that a lot of people miss. And I have had seasons as well where it's, like I said, 1, 2, 3 jobs or whatever, but you're right. It gave me a different appreciation, not just for the full-time work, but for, like you said, the people that you're walking alongside. I love the word that you used, with. Yeah. You're walking with them. That's so key.
You could say it, the gift of being bi-vocational rather than I have to be bi-vocational. It's a gift.
Yeah.
That's right.
The main thing with somebody that would be struggling with that, something we've had the advantage of is going through what we went through in planting. We had to know that we knew that we were called.
Yes.
Like it just, Lord confirmed it over and over again. And so every step of our ministry here in Rainier, we've walked in that, knowing that we're called to do this. And so when you know you're called to do something, you'll do whatever you have to do to make it happen.
Right.
And, for the guys out there that are bivocational, you get tired, you get discouraged. Getting up and going to work is difficult. I remember one time I went and met with another pastor and walked into his office, and he had this beautiful office and secretary. And I'm just like, oh Lord, I want that. But then it's like, but the Lord's called me to do something different. And one of the illustrations I use like that, it's, in millwrighting. I don't know if you know what a millwright is. A lot of people don't. Most people don't. But basically, you work with tools in a mill, changing parts, changing stuff. And I got in it just through a company of a guy in the church and different things. But so you're always working out of a toolbox. And the Lord just spoke to me one time when I was working. I went to grab a tool, and they joke around the 3 rules of millwrighting is always use the right tool for the job. A crescent or a hammer is the right tool always the right tool for the job. And a crescent wrench can be used as a hammer. And it just hit me one time. I was reaching the toolbox and I was grabbing the wrong tool to do something with. And it's just like, the Lord's just like, sometimes you feel like I'm using you like that. Like you're a crescent wrench. You should be doing something, fine tuning something, or, but I'm using you to smack on something. And, and it's like, our job as pastors is to be, and really believers, is to be the best tool we can be.
Yes.
And how the Lord chooses to use that is up to him.
That's right.
And so, like for these bivocational pastors, I mean, I've had that exact same feeling, like, Lord, why am I doing this? As I'm working, mixing concrete in the literally every house I think we've built, we've ended up pouring concrete in the snow. And it's absolutely miserable when you're building a house on a hillside that's in the mud and you're carrying forms. And, I've had a lot of those times where like, Lord, what am I doing?
Yeah.
Why this is hard work. It's not fun. And it just comes back to, I've called you to this, are you willing to be the best tool you can be and be used how I choose to use you, not how you want to be used? Because, all of us would have a dream of ministry, what we want that to look like.
Yeah. But it'd be shallow though. I'm sure. I mean, it would never be to the depth that God called us to if we just did, the things that you think about when you were youth pastors. When I was a young youth pastor, the dreams that I had were so much less. I mean, so far below what God had called us to. Because we had no idea.
Yeah.
Yeah. You got to walk through all of that. So yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Yep.
I see Chad's taking notes like a boss down there. I saw him going to.
Yeah, be the best tool you can be is probably the best thing I've heard today. So thank you for that. That's, I mean, and I would just pull that out just to like at any scenario, even because you can still experience what you're talking about, even in a full-time setting and go, what am I doing? I mean, like look around and go, what am I doing? Surely Brent and I joke around all the time. So you always have like your plan B. Mine lately has been Chick-fil-A. Don't ask me why. Outside of I look in there, even when it's crazy, and I go, well, I hear really great things. They seem they're a well-oiled machine. I've done fast food management before. I could probably do that. I've led a church surely, and I would have Sunday off. So
could do both.
And so it's like you longingly look, but then you go, no, being the best tool is not there. It's here, and that's what I'm getting to.
It is my pleasure to serve you.
Yep.
Is it really though? That's always every time. And my wife she like starts to give me the look now because she knows what's coming. They say my pleasure. I'm like, is it though? Really?
You know what? Chick-fil-A is not a sponsor of this podcast yet.
They're not.
Years ago, a pastor that I was working with showed a video, and the theme was everything for the harvest. And he showed this video of this young couple with a son that were wheat farmers, and the husband dies. And so the harvest is ready to come in. Everything's been planted. Everything's growing. So now it's harvest time, and they're going to lose everything if they don't get this harvest in. And so the whole video kind of plays up, and it's a short video. I wish I knew what it was, but if I could remember what it was, but it culminates, they're going to lose everything. They're, kind of last meal kind of thing together. And, here we go, we're going to lose the farm and dad's gone. And, it's really tearjerker and sad. Well, then you hear the roar of all the combines from all the neighbors coming up, and so all the neighbors did their own fields, and then they all met, and, they show this picture of these like 20 combines coming down the road and coming to harvest. And, the purpose of the reason the pastor showed the video is his theme was everything for the harvest, but it really hit me is you have no harvest without a harvester.
Yep.
And the church, we write off the guys doing the ministry, but really, how valuable are the ones in the ministry? Like we have no harvest. There is no church without men and women willing to sacrifice and go through all the pain that we talk about.
Yeah.
No ministry. There's nothing. There's no kingdom in the U.S. There's no church in the U.S. God's will is not being done without leaders like all of us and you guys that without them doing it. And so from a business perspective, from a Chick-fil-A perspective, what does it take for them to get a manager trained up, equipped, in the position, doing the job? You look at the kingdom. I mean, for both of you guys, I know a little bit about what it took Brenton to get into ministry, but it's a process. And once they're in and established and going, man, keeping them healthy is so important.
Yes.
Because there's not a long line of people waiting to take your position, and so, man, how valuable are the pastors out there that are doing it? And, I'm really passionate about just seeing especially young ministers, keep their marriage together, stay focused, stay healthy, because they're irreplaceable. Their value is incredible.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Good.
So question then, with throughout the roller coaster of church planting, what would, and I mean, you guys have certainly experienced it, and especially over, 20 years, my goodness, I can't imagine the motion sickness that you probably have, right? But what would you attribute your longevity really to? I mean, within this specific ministry, the church that you have pioneered, where you're at right there.
There's a lot of things. One was knowing we were called.
Yeah.
Knowing that we heard from the Lord. That's just being stubborn. Just
it's good.
Like, we know God called us, being convinced that God is real, that we're going to stand before him, and wanting to be faithful and just do what he's told us to do. Just that commitment that,
Yeah. For me, it's the breathers of camps and mission trips. Like those are my highlights. And those are like me going back to the well and just like having an adventure with Jesus, watching him in just a few days at a camp, rock kids world. I mean, that is what I live for.
Yeah.
Like that is my joy. And then you do a missions trip, whether it's to Haiti or Fiji or Mexico, and you get 2 weeks with a team and you watch Jesus heal people and cast out demons and preach the gospel and watch people get saved. I mean, that is what has kept me going. And there's so much investment to be able to do those things. It's such a huge time investment. But I feel like I ride on those experiences for months, for years. And so I can't imagine doing ministry without those things. I mean, the week to week is what keeps you going. But those are like when you just feel like you just get this huge drink of fresh water and you just keep going. That's
good. That's really good. So
I've been on some of those missions trips, by the way, and they are fantastic.
2024, Brenton. Let's go.
Let's do it.
Well, and I've been at camps with you guys, and so I know exactly what you're talking about, and I think it speaks to something. It's not just, you're right. It's that right. That's a big deal in any setting. And there's a little bit of stubbornness, i.e., you're crazy, right? That you encounter, but it's also taking the times to know what fills you, right? Whether it's those trips or it's, it's the whole 80-20 principle, right? Like 80% of what we do is just garbage, but it's that 20% that's so good, it outweighs the rest of it. And so we just have to keep doing it.
I feel like, go ahead, Brenton.
I was going to say I've heard the same thing about golf. You play because you hit it one time in 18 holes and go back.
Yeah. I feel like as well, just the Lord says that we're supposed to genuinely love each other. And I, coming back to genuinely loving people makes it worth it too.
Yes.
Like, not just lip service, but I pray that for us and for our church that we have a genuinely heartfelt love for each other, and just a bond. I think that's important too. And as far as like being called, like we have a unique situation in that in planting the church, we knew that God called us, but I've been in places before where you're having a hard time hearing from the Lord. And it's like, Lord, what do you want me to do? And, and obviously you go back to the last thing that you heard and you're faithful with that, but really just being faithful where you're at, like, however you got there, whatever you're doing, until God says to do something different, just put your head down and go and be faithful, with what's in front of you, even if you don't necessarily can't point to a time that God said, go do this,
So so we've talked about 20 years since pioneering, planting, depending on how you verbiage you use. What is the first thing that you would say to someone who comes to you and says, hey, I think I want to plant a church?
Seek the Lord.
If they're married, I would say, is your spouse in complete agreement and ready to work your butt off together? It doesn't work if, I think a lot of Paul and I's success is that we both know that we know we're called. And we share the load together. I can't imagine one of us trying to carry it without the other. There's just
our form of ministry is, like I say in raising up the young people at the church, the same thing in our family. We're all in. like, when we married, when I was praying for a wife, I prayed for a wife that would join me in ministry, and I looked for that, and so that's kind of what attracted us to each other a little bit, is we're both called. And I think we've both had to remind each other of that at times, why we're doing it, and what we're doing. So that's good.
Yeah. And I think I would, I don't know, you hear this over and over, that who you church plant with is not who you end up with. Like,
oh my gosh, yes. Yes.
I've heard that over and over, and I was like, it's so true. So you start off with, you still end up with a few of your core people, but like a lot of who joins you initially is not there a year later. And there's, you kind of, after 3 years, you realize, okay, this is really our core. So like, just if you know that kind of going in, it doesn't get you all Twitter pated. You're just like, okay, God's still building his church. It's not going to be the initial 20 that we had. Yeah.
Okay. So I just have to pause there, because you actually, I think you hit the thing for me. That was probably one of our biggest challenges, because I remember people telling me that. And I'd look around at our core. These are people. They're dear friends. Yeah. They still are. And I would go, no, we're going to be the one that's different. Now, I'm going to fight for and almost to maybe my detriment in some ways. That really there's some that you should. That is where God was taking them, was someplace and moving on. And I would like, no, kind of a thing. And was a source of some pain, in that as well.
Go ahead, Paul.
Just to that, different times, there's people in the church that you wonder how you'd go on without them. Brent and Nicole.
Yep.
Like,
oh my goodness.
Imagine having Brent and Nicole as your youth pastors. I mean, they were amazing.
It's a sad day.
But it's like just understanding that, like, things happen, things go on even when those people are gone, and not Brent and Nicole, but other ones we've had that have moved on. It's amazing how sometimes you lose somebody and it's painful, but then you realize that growth happened because they moved on, because they stepped out and moved on. It either removed a roadblock, or maybe something was dammed up and they removed it, and the water's flowing.
Yeah. Well, I know you, Paul and Janice both taught Nicole and I to lead with an open hand, and
that's good.
Pray through transition. Those moments where you don't know how you can live without somebody until they're not there, and the Lord has sustained you and even grown you as an individual, or you as a body of Christ, and how, like, those key positions that you think you need, when they're empty, how many people step up and what leaders are developed because of it, and other ministries that pop up because there's now space for those things. I mean, so many opportunities for God to work through that. And just, but you two taught me how to lead with this open hand of, all right, Lord, I'm going to put them in your hand. And so now you do with them what you're calling them to do, and I'm going to do and be faithful. So thank you. Thank you for that.
Yeah. And, God gave his best.
Yes.
And sent his son. He gave his best. He sacrificed everything, and it's kind of worked out okay.
Yes.
I think it has us. But, Brent and I, what I talked about the other day, a couple of core things that I think every pastor needs to keep in mind is it's not our church.
Yeah.
It's the Lord's church. And so that carries out, that means the individuals are not our people.
Yeah.
They're God's people. And we had something unique just a week ago is our leader of our seniors heard somebody was speaking at another church. So he took all of our seniors to this other church for a Sunday morning. And at first it was like, but it's like, you know what? Be blessed, man. They'll get something good out of it, but just that reminder that these aren't my people. These are God's people. And when we hang on to them too tightly, God's going to remind us whose they are and who they belong to. And what goes along with that is it's the Lord that builds the church. We don't build it. Like, we're back to that tool thing is we're the best tool we are. And in the process, God builds his church, so I think those two things. I think it's really good for us pastors to keep our eyes on is, Lord, what are you doing? You're the one building this church. You care more about these people than I do. and they're your people. So if one jumps ship and goes somewhere else or does something goofy, that's the Lord's issue, not mine.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and really that pain of that happening, we need to get over it as quick as we can.
Yeah.
Because it really is our issue. It's the Lord's got things. He knows what he's doing, so it's us that needs to get past that and just figure out how to move on as quick as we can.
Yeah.
Well, I'm glad that you guys have all said that specific phrasing of open-handed, because I feel like that was definitely the thing that we had to learn, especially in that season, was that we hold people open-handed, and that I can actually be withholding what's best for them, not just me, in on all of this, and that is essentially stewarding that which God has given you, or the resources or people or finance or whatever, but it's meant to be open-handed and given away. And so that's really good. Thank you guys for all sharing that.
Yeah.
That was good. So same vein of that original question of what you say to someone who's, I want to plant a church, or I think I do. What are some of the key, I feel like skill is the wrong word.
Qualities.
Maybe it's maybe it's mentalities or factors or things that really should be in place for anybody who's like, we're doing this.
I always go back to the 3 C's: character, competency, and calling. It comes back to your calling. Do you know that that's where you're supposed to go? Don't go anywhere else than God has told you to go, because that's what you're going to come back to when all the storms start hitting, and you'll be like, what am I doing? And you're like, oh, God called me here. So you will always come back to your calling. Your character is who you are when nobody else is looking, and you are not going to make it if your character is not impeccable and pure. And so you've got to be a person of integrity, that you got to be faithful in the little things so that God can give you more. But then there is a level of competency. So for example, don't try to lead worship if you cannot carry a note in a bucket. I mean, don't do it. That is not your gifting. You are not competent in that area. So find somebody who is, because, making sure that if you know that you're called, staff your weaknesses, or, hopefully your spouse helps with those weaknesses, but you need those 3 C's. That
great. That is so good.
So when we started the church, we started renting an old school, and it had literally white vinyl floor. It was cafeteria. So old school white vinyl rolled out every 6 feet. You had a seam that was peeling up. So I found some white duct tape to hold it down. And the walls were yellow, bright yellow, industrial paint kind of thing in a cafeteria. And think lemons. And we couldn't afford, we had no support. When we started the church, Janice's grandparents gave us a little bit of money that bought a microphone and some speakers. That was it. That was the only help we had. And when we started the church, I was driving school bus, and we had been unemployed for a year as youth pastors, and so we had nothing. And, so we started the church with that. So they had a sale on white plastic lawn chairs down at the hardware store. So we went down and bought 100 white plastic lawn chairs and thought we were spending more money than we had.
$4.
Yeah.
$400.
So that's how we started it. And I was struggling with that, I'm like, cause I have visions, man, we're going to be the cool church in town. We're going to have, all this stuff. And the Lord said, if thought came to my mind, I can't say it was the Lord, but if I can't start a church like this, if the Lord isn't going to show up and do something here with this, then I don't have no business starting a church.
Yep.
And, and that's true. When do you launch? You'll never be ready.
Yep.
So at some point you just got, okay, God, you're in this or you're not. Let's, and you just do it, and the Lord shows up, and he brings people.
Yeah.
But, just being, and then one of the things I had to realize early on too is I can't do everything I want to do. When I go to a conference, it's almost discouraging sometimes. Lord, I get all this vision and all these things I want to do. And then I go back and sit in my office and I'm like, man, I can't do any of these things. So you do what God's called you to do and really trust that it's him. It's he's in it. And take the pressure off yourself, man. Do what you're called to do and let God fill in the cracks.
Yeah.
If your only worship leader is one that can't carry a tune, like worship, if God's called you to do it, he's going to provide. Things will happen.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. So you hit worship was the thing for us. I'm glad that you brought that up because especially speaking to I can't believe that this is not what I pictured how this would go. Like just through a process of, and I'm not going to get into the details of just different things. We never had a consistent worship leader. And at one point we were using YouTube as our worship.
Yeah.
And I remember we were Saturday nights then. The first Saturday night we did this, one of our pastors who's on the team comes up to me. She could see that I'm in the back, just like, I can't believe I had to do this, like this is our church, and she's like, this is totally fine. Yeah. This is what God wants. This is what's going to be. And now in the setting that we're in, whenever somebody complains about the worship or there's not this, or, how's it sound, that I go, until you have hit play on your computer.
Yes.
I don't want to hear about, but man, it goes back to what you said of this, whose church is this? This isn't mine. This isn't a reflection of me. This is what God has done. And I go back to that. God had to use that season to grind out whatever in me that just wasn't supposed to be there, to where I can go, God, I'm just here to worship. And
Chad,
thank you for sharing that.
Can I just ask, is the person who asked or said it's fine, is she the one that's now leading the church? Yeah,
she is. She is indeed. And so that's as we transitioned. Good. And that was another thing. There was a season where we felt we were supposed to go back into the home, which was also felt like going backwards to me. But we saw really an explosion. I can honestly say that of ministry that took place in our basement that we hadn't, starting as a traditional sense. I mean, we baptized more people in the inflatable hot tubs that we had in the basement, than we saw before. And that's what the church has become. It's more of a house church thing. And that's what it was supposed to be. And so, So it's like, all right, God, I guess you know what you're doing. So
some really good friends of ours pioneered a church just a year before we did. And it took off and grew. They were using other facilities. So then they got to the point where, man, let's rent our own and, do build outs. And they did it, fixed it up, just beautiful. And things didn't crash, but almost. Like the minute they moved in, they couldn't fill it. And it just struggled the whole time they were there. And then finally the place they're renting from raised their rent to where they couldn't afford it. So they moved back into a school and the church took off.
Yes.
And just did amazing. And so then they got to the point where they had to build out again. And that time they built out, almost did the opposite, almost built out too small. But they were building out to fit the church, not their wants, the second time. The first time they built what they wanted. Second time they built out what they needed, and God blessed it. I mean, they haven't looked back. I mean, it's just been awesome. But yeah.
Well, it just goes back to what you said earlier, even with the bivocational stuff of when you have what you think it's supposed to be, that actually becomes your master. It's like that thing that's hanging over your head, and it limits you on what you're really should be doing. And I'll tell you what, if there's something I wish I would have learned, and I'm curious, this would be like a follow-up question for you guys. For me, is that I didn't have it figured out. I wasn't going to be, like you said, I'm going to be the one that does it right, kind of a thing. When you look back on like for you in the beginning, what are some of the things that you wish, man, I wish I could have or should have maybe done differently?
Well, I think you use who you have, and then we got kind of, shot in the foot, by a bookkeeper at one point. But it seemed good when we chose to use her. So it's hard. I feel like you can't plan what you don't know. You just do the best you can. Like oh, we need somebody to do worship. We need somebody to do the books. It shouldn't be us. And so we found somebody that was faithful, that was tithing, that seemed like, this is her gifting. And then it just really didn't end up well, good. It just, but I don't know, like that's the only thing I can think of that I wish, it kind of set us back and was a kind of a hard thing, but I don't know how we could have done it differently.
Yeah, even in those, like the Lord uses those things to refine you and to bring things out into the open and all of that stuff. Like I'm finding more and more in those things that like, if I would have just known this, I would never have done that. But then what else wouldn't have happened because of that? And so it's so hard to look back and go, I wish I would have done it this way or whatever.
I can't say, did I cut you off, Brenton?
No.
Okay. I can't say that I would look back and say I'd do it different with authority. I couldn't say that, but something I've always questioned and not been sure of is when to hire staff and how much to pay them, when to pull people in that way. For example, tech people, should we give them a stipend? Should we not? How much do we need to hang on to them? We haven't had a good sound gathering here and there through the last 20 years, and that's been really difficult. And so should we have brought somebody in and given them a stipend to hold on to somebody? Those kind of things. Even when Brenton and Nicole were moving on, we were praying, Lord, should we try hiring them? We really didn't have it, but it's like, Lord, is there something we could creatively do? Throughout pastoring last 20 years, there's been those kind of questions. If I would have done this different, would that have played out something different? If I would have not worked quite as much, that's always been something I've wrestled with. How much do I work? How much do I give to the ministry? What's the standard of living and level of living that we need? Those kind of things, are always, should I do this? Should I not do this? And I don't know until with the Lord where I made those big mistakes and screwed up. And he's like, man, you could have opened this door if you would have just went a little farther there and not backed off so much.
Yeah.
We're next to a bigger community in Longview. It's across the river that's a mile wide, on a big bridge. So there's kind of a natural barrier. A lot of people won't cross necessarily. But I have a pastor friend that's always like, man, you should be reaching out over there. And I feel like we're called to Rainier, so we've really stuck to just being in Rainier. But that's one of those things like, man, I wonder, what would it look like if I would have done that? I don't know yet, but someday we'll know.
Well, so, and not to spin you guys out in what you do differently, but maybe the follow-up with that is what, in those moments, then what do you feel like you learn about you in those kind of questions as they come up, or even doubts?
I have a hard time getting out of my own head. Like, you don't know what you don't know. And sometimes I feel like, man, I learned for myself, I need to step back and listen and move a little slower sometimes. And, give the Lord time to speak. He needs a lot of time. The Lord needs a lot of time to speak to us, especially me, I think, so that's one thing I've kind of learned.
The cool thing about me is I'm not the head pastor of the church. I don't have to carry the heavy lifting, which is awesome. So I feel like for me, I just get to have fun and worship and enjoy the ministry. Of the
she
Holy
does all
Spirit.
the fun stuff.
Called to Fiji. I feel like I do all the fun stuff, and Paul has to carry the heavy lifting. But here's the awesome thing: at the beginning of the church, God gave me a very clear vision that is how our ministry needed to look. And I was being overly motivated and type A personality and just really striving instead of relaxing in our role as ministry. And it was probably within the first 9 months, God gave me a vision of me just out in a field worshiping, having a great time with the Lord. And I was like, where is Paul? Because that's what I felt like. I mean, I was just struggling. Where is Paul? Is he working hard enough? And in this vision, the Lord said, turn around. And here was Paul with this huge lawnmower type thing, clearing the way for everybody else to come, And wow. And then he reinforced that vision with another one where, Paul's building this huge freeway so that everybody else can come and all the ministry can come. And I think he does hear from the Lord, and he has done what he's supposed to do. He's built an infrastructure that is going to carry on for way past our ministry. And so, I think he's done a good job.
One of the cool things I was talking about, my calling being, missions is kind of mentioned in there. And I know that's been it's cool because Janice was a cross-cultural minor in Bible college, or major in Bible college. That was kind of her focus. And so not just sending money, but I've been able to, as a church, we've been able to send her to do ministry overseas and missions and that kind of thing. So that's been kind of fun. She's gotten to do some pretty cool stuff. And if anybody ever wants to go to Fiji, they need to get a hold of us.
We'll be sure to list your info in the show notes for that.
So Pastor John over there has been doing amazing stuff, and he's getting older, and there's nobody coming up behind him. We live in a small town, and it's really one of the difficult things in ministry is the talented young people find somewhere else to go. Yes. Some stay, but we've had very few stick around and to build on. And in Fiji, it's even more so. If they can get off the island among the Indo-Fijians, the Indians there, if they can get off the island, they do. And so all the sharp young people from the islands have left. And so you have a pastor there with a burden for people and doing an amazing job. But there's no help coming up behind him.
Yeah.
And so that support you guys give is crucial.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, Brenton's been over there. He's seen it. It's pretty amazing. We're blessed every time we go. Yeah. We get to see God do miracles and do amazing stuff and get encouraged.
It's good. Well, and I want to affirm our family has actually been impacted by your ministry. I say mine personally. So Janice, when you spoke at the camp, years ago, it was my oldest. It was her first year as a camper, and she still draws back on just the things that you have spoke directly into her life as the speaker there. And so I just want to say, for as much as maybe you get in our own heads and all the things that by any standard that maybe others would say, but that the Lord definitely says that you are a success. You continue to be a success. And I'm just grateful for everything you guys have done and the heart that you have for your city, for your people, and for the world beyond.
Please tell your daughter I said hi, because I've been thinking about her the whole time. I'm glad you brought her up. So
yes, I absolutely will. She will love that.
And I'm actually crying because I remember her, and I still have. I am crying. Don't show me. I still have her little note that she gave me because she's why I do what I do.
Yeah,
that's wonderful.
And there are missionaries all over the world because of you guys. The people that you've sent and were like invested in there, not just in your kids and Nicole and I can think of others that I won't name them because I don't know what they can name themselves down the road. But you guys have a ministry that has gone all over the world and is replicating. And so the seeds that you have sown are, it's a legacy that you have left and you're alive to see it like playing out. So that's awesome.
That's one of our joys in ministry. I heard someone preaching the other day, and they talked about the Apostle Paul hasn't gotten his reward yet. And the reason he hasn't gotten it is because it's still being formed.
Oh, wow.
Like all of us are a part of that. And isn't that a cool picture? Like each one of you guys doing this podcast, like everything we do is, gives to the future. We don't even see the fruit.
Yeah.
And pastoring, man, part of the reason we need to be that tool and be the best we can and let God do the rest is because we don't know what he's doing.
Yeah.
That's
we don't even know. There was one time Janice got a word that somebody's back was hurt. And so she prayed during the service for somebody's back. Didn't know anything about it. Didn't hear anything. It was a year later that we were over at a family in the church, their house. And he's like, oh yeah, by the way, he literally broke his back and God did a complete miracle.
Popped it. Boom. And his back was healed from then on.
Yeah.
Holy moly.
I was like, come on, man.
A year.
Wow. Come on, man. That's good.
Yeah. So, isn't that ministry? Like we do things, you'll say something from the pulpit and it'll change your life.
Yeah.
Something in conversation. We'll never know it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But.
Yep.
So then this is some of the last question that you've hit, but I think maybe you can pull out a little bit more, but like we call the podcast Ministry Without Hating It. So how have you learned to do ministry without hating it?
Ooh. Do what you love and don't get put in the box that is expected of you. And I'll probably get in trouble for saying this later publicly. I have never regretted staying in youth ministry and being comfortable, even as I'm not quite 48, 47-year-old mom. And people are like, don't you feel like it's ready for you to do women's ministry? No, I do not. Because I think when you're doing what you love to do and what you're supposed to do, and you're still effective at it, you need to stay in that pocket. And so I know that I sense that God is like kind of bringing that to a close. He's raising up amazingly, one of the babies that was born in our church is coming on staff this summer as a youth pastor for us, as a middle school youth pastor.
Wow.
And
that's
I
amazing.
see that season ending, but I never regret doing the typical pastor's wife thing, because guess what? I would have been done 2 years in. Like I would have withered up and died. And I'm having so much fun mentoring young youth pastors coming up. And they say, how do you direct a camp? How do you pray for the baptism of the Holy Spirit for people? How do you do this? And that has been so much fun. I would not trade that for anything.
Mm-hmm.
I think everybody that was raised in the church has to find a way to stay fresh with the Lord. Not just ministry, but you have to stay open and in a place where you're receiving from the Lord. It's so easy to get in a place where we're on autopilot, just doing what we do. That's one of the reasons that I love OSL, is just like right now we're taking it and it's just fresh, but just anytime we take time with the Lord, anytime we set time aside for the Lord, he shows up, whether that's a camp or our morning devotions. When we do it on a regular basis, it's not fresh every morning, it is, but we're not receiving it every morning. You have to stay humble and open before the Lord. You have to genuinely love people, right where they're at. There's things like that you have to build into your life. I think whether you're a pastor or just a person that goes to work every day, you have to keep humble before the Lord and just loving people and hearing from him.
Mm-hmm.
So.
And
fantastic.
And forgive.
Yeah.
You cannot have unforgiveness. In fact, Chad, you and Brenton and I sat in a tent, I believe, at camp, and we talked about a really hard situation, and I needed to forgive. And I think you're done in ministry if you ever have unforgiveness and bitterness that settles in, and you don't let God deal with it. That's where you get bitter old pastors' wives. And so,
And you don't want that.
No, you gotta keep your well clean. You can't let unforgiveness get down in there and spoil. So
that is so good. Yes.
Yeah. How quickly that, we're called to forgive.
Yes.
And the longer we hang on to it, the deeper it grows. But, like Jesus forgave immediately. Yeah. We call on him, it's done. And that's how we're called to forgive as well. Yeah.
And what Janice just brought up, as pastors in a typical pastor situation where the husband is the pastor and the wife stays at home or works or whatever and isn't fully in ministry like we are, one of the things you got to be really careful to do is not dump issues on your wife.
Yeah.
I've seen too many pastors that have been in ministry for the 20 years, 30 years, that their wives are
angry.
Yeah.
Crabby pastors' wives, and it's because they've been beat up and their husbands have dumped things on them and hasn't followed through with how situations have healed or the forgiveness side of things, or they haven't walked through that side. They've just been a punching bag and a place where the male can dump things. and it doesn't work out.
Yeah.
So we need to be careful that we don't do that.
No, that's really good advice. And I'm going to say advice. It's wisdom, because it's really easy to think. We actually did a whole episode with pastors' kids, and how they bear the weight.
Good.
But, the ministry spouse, husband or wife, they bear just as much, if not more. And it's good to have that awareness of, they're going through this too. And I have to shepherd their hearts as well.
Well, they don't see the victories like you do as a pastor. And they don't share your heart necessarily for individual people that you're dealing with as well.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so much like wisdom and depth. And that was just in the last question right there. Like I hear all those and go, man, we could make this a 2-hour episode. How could we,
You've obviously found something we're passionate about.
Yes.
We love ministry.
That's great. Well, I can see that. I just feel it just even in this conversation alone. I know others will as well. And I just want to say once again, thank you for your passion for the ministry, but also for the ministry leaders and needing and wanting to equip them. That just continues to carry on. And I do believe that you're going to continue to see the fruit that comes from that.
Yeah. Amen.
Well, thanks for joining us for this episode of Ministry Without Hating It. We hope it's helped you take another step further to loving what you do more through the wisdom of others. We want to again thank today's guests, Paul and Janice Rice. Man, what a great, vulnerable, and yet really some profound wisdom that they've passed along. I hope you're able to grab some of that. If you'd like to connect further with Paul and Janice or even find out more about their missions work in Fiji, we have made ways to do so available in the episode show notes. And if you'd like to connect further with us, support the podcast, or sign up for show updates, just go to withouthatingit.com to get started. And don't forget to subscribe to Ministry Without Hating It wherever it is that you get your podcast so you don't miss out on our future episode releases. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time.